Okay, so I've redrawn this diagram with the perceived value being, on average, what people in the marketplace are willing to pay for a particular product based on its characteristics, its image, the advertising, all those sorts of things that go into determining consumer behavior, right? The price that the company sets for the product, and the fully laden costs of production. And like we talked about, the difference between price and cost is the margin. The difference between perceived value and price is the consumer surplus. Okay. What I didn't say before is sort of the definition of total difference, right? So for our purposes, what we're going to say is the difference between the perceived value and the cost is what we're going to call the total value added, which when you think about it, the costs include all the equipment, all of the material, all the labor, all the overhead that goes into producing the product, right? So take a company like Apple. They take circuit boards and screens and buttons and whatnot, right? Software, but also production space, and also R&D that's been done, and executive salaries, and they take all of these together and they create something that people are willing to pay a lot more for, right? So the fully laden cost of an iPhone may be $150, but they transform all those inputs into a product that people are willing to pay maybe $800 or $1,000 for. So they've added value to all of those inputs. Okay. Now the punchline, and we'll reinforce this later, but the punchline is the company that's in best position to win strategically. In other words, the company that's in the best position to generate long-term abnormal returns is always going to be the company that has the biggest total value added, right? So if your company can generate a bigger difference between what people are willing to pay and what it costs you to produce, if your difference is bigger than everybody else in your industry, you're in a position to generate these abnormal returns, okay? Still no guarantee. Right? Just like having great profits is no guarantee of great returns, having great value added is no guarantee either, because you still have to manage that value effectively. Okay, so you could sort of think of a hypothetical example. So we're talking about this difference between perceived value and cost. We still have to decide on price, right? And that price is up to us as a company. So we may, choose to set our price equal to our cost. Right? We're still creating exactly the same total value. But if the price equals the cost, we're not generating any margin. We're not generating any profit, right? So all the value that's being created is flowing to the consumer. They get the benefit of all the value, okay? So pricing strategy, among many, many other things, is going to be one of the elements that determines our ability to effectively extract or appropriate the value that's being created, okay? So we have to create the value, but then we also have to appropriate it, okay? So I want to talk a little bit more about that. So let's take a specific but simplified and sort of hypothetical example. Okay, if you ever learned physics in high school or college, you always learn about the laws of motion on a frictionless plane, because you have to sort of simplify to understand the fundamentals, right? And then you can add in all the complicating factors. We're going to do that a little bit here. So in this case, our frictionless plane is going to be a market where it's a pure duopoly, meaning there's something you need to buy and you've only got two places you can buy it from. Okay, and just for sake of argument, let's say that the product we're looking to buy is dog food. Okay, if you've got a dog, you got to buy dog food. Got it. And let's say there's one particular brand of food that your dog prefers, right? And in the two stores where you can get that food, it's the same brand, it's the same flavor, it's the same packaging, it's the same quantity, right? What that should tell you is the perceived value in those two stores are the same, right? Because it's the same product. I don't care where I buy from. I'm not willing to pay more for it just because it comes from one store or another, right? Now, again, some of those simplifying assumptions, perceived value is going to be affected by things like convenience. So maybe one of these stores is right on my way home from work and the other one is a little bit out of my way. Well, the one that's convenient for me, I would have a slightly higher perceived value. I'm willing to pay a little bit more because it's so convenient. Okay, so we're assuming that both of these stores are alike. They're both equally comfortable, they're both equally well lit, they're both equally convenient, and the product they're selling me is exactly the same. In that case, it really makes no difference to me who I buy it from, the perceived value is going to be the same way. Okay, now, just to make this a little more salient, let's put some names to these companies. So let's say this is Walmart, and this is Target. And again, I'm to say that perceived value is the same in these two stores, I sort of have to simplify a little bit, because I know for a lot of people, Walmart has a lower perceived value because the stores tend to not be as clean. The people seem to be a little weird. You got to, whatever, you got to deal with the unwashed masses. So, all else equal, maybe I'm less likely to shop at Walmart because of the environment. Okay, which means I would have a slightly lower perceived value. Okay, we're gonna sort of ignore that for a second. We're gonna say that these stores are both equal. Okay, in the environment, in the cleanliness, in the customer service, all these other things that are going to affect my perceived value. Okay, so the next question is, how would the costs at Walmart compare to the costs at Target? And the answer there is the costs are lower at Walmart. Okay, and what you're going to find as we go through this class, we're going to do a lot of very rigorous analysis, but none of it's going to be quantitative. I don't have to put numbers on this for it to make sense. Okay. There's going to be a lot of qualitative analysis based on rigorous tools and careful sort of critical thought without any calculations at all. Okay, so I can draw lines here, and I know that the costs at Walmart are lower than Target. I don't need to know at this point for our purposes how much lower or specifically what those costs are. Okay, now a fair question would be to say, okay, how do you know that the costs at Walmart are lower? And most people will tell you it's because Walmart advertises that they have low costs, right? I know because I've seen the flyers, I've seen the TV commercials. Walmart tells me that they have low costs. But if you stop and think about it for a second, I've never personally seen a Walmart ad that talked about their everyday low costs, right? Now, what they advertise is everyday low prices. Okay, and this is one of those really important things that's easy to get mixed up that you need to get straight. Okay, price and cost are completely different things, and in some cases there might be a relationship between the two. In fact, in some cases there definitely is a relationship between the two. But hopefully what you can see through this illustration in just a minute, just because a company has the lowest costs does not necessarily mean they will or should have the lowest prices. And just because a company has the lowest prices does not mean that they will or should have the lowest costs. Okay, we do know that Walmart has lower costs than Target, but we know it because we know something about their operations. We know something about their scale. They have power over their suppliers because they're such an important customer. They have incredibly efficient inventory management processes. They turn over inventory faster than any other mass market retailer. Okay, all of those things help them reduce their costs. Okay, so we know based on those capabilities that their costs are lower. Then the question becomes, what should we do about that, right? If you just look at the total value added here, clearly Walmart is in a position to win, as we're defining it strategically, because they have created a greater total value. For the same product, they're able to provide it to us at a lower cost, not price, cost. Okay, which means they've added more total value, they're more efficient, and so they're in a position to generate abnormal returns. Okay. Now, whether or not they actually do that depends on a lot of things, but one of the first things is the price. Okay, so let's talk about a couple of scenarios with respect to that. And this is going to get messy. The whiteboard won't let me selectively erase. I can only clear the whole screen, so I'm going to have to just kind of bear with me here. Let's just take as a baseline, whatever Target's price is. And again, we don't need numbers to talk about this. Let's say that Walmart chooses to match Target's price. Okay, so perceived value is the same, price is the same, but cost is lower. Okay, so if you remember the conversation about the consumer surplus, the difference between perceived value and price, that's going to tell us about market share. That's going to tell us about how many people are going to choose one product over another. Okay, and in this case, because both stores are offering exactly the same consumer surplus on this dog food, what that tells you from a market share perspective is these two companies, these two stores are going to split the market. Right? I'm indifferent. I don't care who I buy from, and neither is anybody else. And so half of us are going to go here, and half of us are going to go here. Okay, it's just the way basic economics work. Okay, so both stores have the same volume basically. But what I know, because of their lower costs, I know that Walmart is earning a bigger margin. Okay, so in this case, Walmart is going to be generating bigger profits than Target, not because they're selling more product, but because they're earning a bigger margin on each unit that they sell. Okay, so in a sense, we could say, all right, Walmart is in a position to win because by doing this, they are generating bigger profits than their competitor. Okay, and that's great. But for our purposes, better isn't always enough. We really want to think about optimization. So the question is, could Walmart adjust their price some way that would actually give them a bigger profit than this scenario? Okay, so maybe we would suggest they should lower their price, undercut Target a little bit. Right? Maybe I should label this sort of price 1 and price 2. Okay, let's just say. Okay, so what would happen if Walmart were to lower their price? Now, we're not comparing to Target anymore. We're talking about two different choices, two different scenarios that Walmart might choose, and we want to understand the implications of those. Okay, so if they lower their price, now they're offering a bigger consumer surplus than the competition, so more people are going to shop here. Walmart will gain volume. They will gain market share. They will gain customers. Okay, awesome. But look what happened here. Now their margin is smaller. Okay, so they're selling more, but they're making less money on each unit. Okay, so the question is, which of those scenarios, whether it's price 1, which is lower volume but higher margin, or price 2, which is higher volume but lower margin, which of those is going to give us the biggest overall profit? Okay, because I want to optimize the amount of value I'm extracting. Okay, and the answer is it depends, right? And the economics term you need to know, you need to learn and understand here is called price elasticity of demand. I know everybody's had an econ class at this point in your educational career, but I know sometimes it gets a little rusty. So price elasticity of demand describes the response of the consumer to a particular change in price, right? And I told you we wouldn't use numbers, but let me just give you a couple of sort of examples here. So let's look at different combinations of margin and volume and overall profit. Okay, so imagine a scenario where a company like Walmart, let's say we lower our price such that we're giving up 10% of our margin, right? We're reducing our margin by 10% by going from price 1 to price 2. Okay, and let's say we do gain volume. We know that it's basic supply and demand. But let's say the volume we gain is 10%, right? Now remembering that profit is equal to our margin times our volume. In this scenario, total profit is unchanged. Oops, I misspelled that. Let me try that again. It's unchanged. There we go. Okay? Because this number went up by 10%, this number went down by 10%, the total is the same. Okay? So if that's the case, then Walmart is indifferent. It makes no difference whether they charge price 1 or price 2. Okay? But that's not always what happens. Sometimes, if we lower our price such that margin goes down by 10%, volume will actually go up by more than that. Maybe it goes up by 30%. Okay? This scenario is what you would call an elastic demand curve. Or, in other words, customers are very responsive to price changes. They're very price sensitive. Okay? And so if you look at the product of these numbers, if one number goes down by 10%, but the other one goes up by 30%, then in this scenario, profit is higher. And Walmart would be better off by charging price 2. Let's sacrifice the margin because we're going to more than make up for it in volume. Okay? But it doesn't always work that way either. You also have scenarios where if you lower the price such the margin goes down by 10%, volume is going to go up, but it may only go up by 5%. Okay? This is what you would call an inelastic demand curve. Right? So in that case, this number goes down by 10%, this number goes up by 5%, my total profit is actually lower. Okay? Because I lowered my price, it has hurt me in my profitability. Okay? So if this is the scenario, if we're dealing with inelastic demand, then Walmart should keep price 1 because they will sell more. They will gain market share if they lower their price. But the market share they gain would not be enough to offset the margin that they gave up. Okay? All three of these are real phenomenon, right? There are products and services and markets that act in all three of these different ways. So our challenge is to understand for our particular market, for our particular product, are we facing a neutral demand curve, or is it an elastic demand curve, or is it an inelastic demand curve? Okay. In fact, we're going to talk about the simulation later, but to effectively run your simulated companies, you're going to be dealing with different markets, some of which are highly price sensitive, where demand is elastic, and you're going to be dealing with other markets where the customers are not price sensitive at all, where demand is highly inelastic. Okay, if you don't understand that, know how to manage it, then it's going to be hard for you to successfully extract the value and create the returns in these companies that you're going to be expected to create. Okay, give you some specific examples because the elasticity depends on a lot of things. In some cases, it depends on the nature of the product. So if we're talking about a necessity, people have to have it. Pharmaceuticals, gasoline, right? Demand tends to be inelastic. The price can change a lot, and demand will change, but not very much, right? So go back to, was it 2007, 8, 9, when the price of gas went from $1.50 to $4, right? The price of gas more than doubled. When the price of gas doubles, demand goes down, but it doesn't fall by half because a lot of the driving we do is not discretion. Pick up the kids from the daycare, right? I can't not do those things just because the gas got more expensive. Now, demand does go down a little because some of my driving is discretionary. So I don't take the summer road trip, or maybe sometimes I take the bus if I can. Okay, that's inelastic demand because volume doesn't change very much in response to the price change. Okay, pharmaceuticals is another example where demand is inelastic. In that case, obviously, if it's a life-sustaining medication, I got to have it. Even if the price goes up, I'm probably still going to buy it. Right now, in that case, when the price dramatically goes up for a pharmaceutical, sadly, demand still does go down a little bit because in any market for any product, there will always be a marginal consumer who either can't or won't spend another dollar for whatever this product is, even if it's pharmaceuticals, even if it's life-sustaining. Okay, so you will see when the price of the EpiPens went through the roof, demand does come down somewhat, but the loss in volume is not nearly as big as the change in price because it's an inelastic demand curve. Okay, actually, I mentioned gasoline. That's an interesting example. If you look at the demand for gasoline as a commodity, the demand is highly inelastic. Price can fluctuate a lot, and demand won't change very much. Okay, when you think about gasoline at the retail level, though, right? I'm sure you've seen this where there's a Casey's gas station on this corner and there's a BP gas station on this corner. If one of those stations changes the price of the gas by a penny, suddenly everybody's going to go buy gas there, right? So in that scenario, a small change in price leads to a big change in volume. Okay, so at the retail level, gas is highly elastic. Okay, and part of that is because it's interchangeable, right? It's a commodity. There's no differentiation between the gas I get at Casey's and the gas I get at BP. So in that case, the only basis I have for choosing one over the other is just the price. So of course I'm going to be price sensitive, right? And they're equally convenient because they're both across the street from each other, and there's no reason not to go to the one that has the cheaper gas. Okay. You also think about characteristics of the market you're selling to. So I said necessities, demand tends to be inelastic, which would mean luxuries, the demand would be elastic. I don't have to have the shoes or the handbag or whatever it is, the jewelry, right? And so if the price goes up, I just won't, I don't have to buy it, right? Except in some cases, think about the demand elasticity for luxury yachts. Nobody has to have those, right? And so you think that would suggest demand is elastic. Except then you think about the characteristics of the people who are buying those products. If I'm on the market for a $30 million yacht, if I've got that kind of money, then a 5 or 10 or 15% fluctuation in the price either direction is not really going to make that big of a difference, right? So if you're dealing with people that have a lot of disposable income, the demand is going to tend to be a little more inelastic, right? Because the price doesn't matter. They're not price sensitive, okay? So you've got to understand that so you can understand how to best extract the value that you've created. And you could think, I mean, and this is one of those things where there's room for some debate, room for some judgment, okay? But if you think about the characteristics of the product itself, dog food, is dog food a necessity? Well, for people who have dogs, their answer would probably be yes, right? The devil's advocate position might be to point out that nobody has to own a dog, right? So if the price of dog food gets too high, you could just get rid of the dog, or you could feed the dog table scraps or something else. But, as somebody who has had pets over the years, I know that's not really the way it works, right? When you have a dog, you want to take care of the dog, you want to get the dog what it wants, which means that dog food really is a necessity, okay? That would suggest that demand would be relatively inelastic. People would not be price sensitive. They would buy it even if the price went up dramatically, okay? On the other hand, and this is a common characteristic of these kind of analyses that we're going to do, you're going to get indicators that point in different directions, right? So the fact that the dog food is a necessity suggests inelastic demand. But there are other characteristics that suggest that it's more elastic, right? So for example, I've got 2 stores here that I can choose from, right? Which means, and I'm getting the same product from either one, which means I've got no other basis to choose one over the other except for price. So if they're both giving me the same thing and one is cheaper, of course I'm going to go there, right? So that tends to make demand more elastic. There's a bigger response to a change in price, okay? The other thing to think about, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but there are characteristics of the market that matter. And you might say that people who tend to shop at Walmart tend to be lower income, right? Or have less disposable income for some reason, okay? Which means they tend to be more price sensitive. They are price sensitive because they need to be. They need to make their money stretch farther, okay? In which case, again, that suggests elasticity in the demand, that they're going to be more price sensitive. They're going to react more strongly to a change in the price, okay? So collectively, I mean, my conclusion would be demand for dog food at Walmart is relatively elastic. So if they reduce the price, the volume that they gain, it's this second row here, the second scenario, the volume they gain would more than make up for the margin that they sacrificed, meaning that the net profit that they would get would be higher compared to the higher price, okay? And that isn't always the case. And that's where this gets tricky, because for people, for managers who are solely focused on market share and volume and revenue and these kinds of things, and I can't tell you how many companies there are that do that, and how dysfunctional it is, right? For somebody who's just focused on volume, they could claim success in all of these scenarios because they increased volume, they sold more product, right? We know that strategic success isn't about market share or volume, it's about profit. And in some cases, you're actually going to get higher profit with lower volume, right? Like in this lower scenario here, where we're dealing with an inelastic demand curve, I'm better off not selling to these people, because keeping my price high and preserving the margin is what gives me the biggest overall profit, okay? And this is an example where we're talking about lowering price, but you can go through exactly the same exercise when you're talking about raising the price. The only difference would be you'd have positive margin changes here and negative volume changes here. In some cases, you raise the price a little, demand's going to fall a lot. That's elastic demand. In some cases, you could raise the margin quite a bit and demand won't fall very much at all. Okay, that's inelastic. And so, like I said, you're going to see this firsthand when it comes time to run the simulated companies. And in fact, I need to come back to this in a little bit, because all those things that we're talking about, they matter so much because the cases we're going to talk about and the analytical tools and the simulation, the decisions you're going to make in the simulation, the only reason we talk about any of those things is because it affects some piece of these pictures that I'm drawing in this whiteboard, okay? Either perceived value or cost or price or some other things that I'm going to go back to the chain of causality in a minute that ends with the abnormal returns to the shareholders, right? Everything we talk about in strategy is important, and the decisions you make in your companies matter because of the impact they have on these various elements, okay? And so your job is to, first of all, make decisions that maximize the value added, right? Maximize the difference between the perceived value of products and your costs of providing them, right? And we'll talk more about how you do that. All the different functional areas play a role in that. All the things that happen on a day-to-day basis have some impact on that value creation, Okay, and then within that, you have to choose a price that most effectively extracts the value. And then once you've done that and you've earned as big of a profit as you can based on the value that you're generating, not market share, but profit, right? Then you have to manage those profits as effectively as possible to turn them into shareholder returns. Okay, so we're going to keep cycling back to this. I'm going to keep referring back to these pictures and these concepts because they really do form the basis of everything else. Okay, so I'm going to cut this off here, and then I'm going to jump back in a minute, and we'll go back to the bigger picture. Okay, so I'll be back shortly.